No way a human can survive that. Not without armor. The words hung in the air like a challenge. The alien students exchanged uneasy glances, their eyes fixed on the figure standing in the middle of the training ground. It was a human, bare-chested, with not a shred of protective gear around him. Holographic dummies spun and flickered, waiting to spring into action. The training instructor, a hulking Taru with a thick ridge running down his back, sneered. "Begin the drill," he barked. The lights flickered, and the holograms activated in an instant. Each one represented a different threat: a slashing blade, a spear thrust, or the crushing force of an energy hammer. Any ordinary cadet would have strapped on the best armor available and hoped for the best, but this human, he stood there with a calm, almost bored expression. The first attack came from his left, a spearhead darting toward his side. The human twisted with such fluid motion that it seemed like he had anticipated it before the drill even began. His hands shot out, snatching the shaft of the holographic spear and yanking it forward, using its own momentum to propel the simulation's wielder off balance. A few of the alien students gasped. This wasn't how the drill was supposed to go. It was designed to overwhelm, to expose weaknesses in a soldier's defense. Yet the human treated it as though he was swatting flies. One of the alien students, a skittish wreath named Vor, whispered to his companion, "How is he doing that?" "I heard humans need armor just to handle their own environments." His friend, a gray-scaled Salon, could only shake his head. "It's madness. He's not wearing any of the protection required for this simulation. The kinetic force alone should be enough to incapacitate him." In the center of the chaos, the human moved like a dancer in a storm. The second attack came from above. A mace swung downward with enough simulated force to shatter bones. He sidestepped and drove his fist into the hologram's midsection. The light-based construct flickered, simulating a disabling strike. A murmur rippled through the observing students. This drill was meant to assess combat readiness, not a show of bravado. Yet here he was, dismantling it with nothing but bare skin and instinct. The Taru instructor crossed his arms, his eyes narrow. He had trained some of the galaxy's most elite soldiers, but this display was unlike anything he'd witnessed. "He'll slip up soon," he muttered under his breath. "And when he does, he'll be on the ground." But the human didn't slip up. If anything, he sped up. The attacks came at him faster now, holograms spinning and striking with lethal precision. He ducked under a blade swing, stepped into the path of a second attack to nullify its force, and caught a hammer blow on his forearm, turning it aside with a flick of his wrist. "That's impossible," Vor stammered, eyes wide. "No creature should be able to react that quickly. Is he enhancing himself with some kind of implant?" The Syrian shook his head, his eyes glued to the scene. "I don't see any signs of augmentation. That's just him." A bead of sweat finally appeared on the human's brow, but it was from exertion, not fear. His muscles rippled with each movement, showcasing a raw, unfiltered power that made even the holograms seem like lesser threats. His eyes, however, remained cold and calculating. They flicked between each incoming strike, processing and reacting in the blink of an eye. "Enough!" the Taru instructor's voice boomed, halting the drill. The holographic enemies froze and then faded out of existence, leaving the human standing alone, breathing deeply but unharmed. "Impressive," the instructor grunted, stepping forward. "But let's see how you handle a real weapon." He gestured to a weapons rack, where various energy-based blades and blunt objects gleamed. "Pick one." The human turned his head slightly, glancing at the rack before returning his gaze to the instructor. "Don't need one," he replied flatly. A chorus of disbelief erupted from the students. A combat drill without armor was insane, but rejecting a weapon? It bordered on suicidal. "You mock this training," the Taru growled. His pride stung. "Do you think you're invincible?" "No," the human responded, his tone disturbingly calm. "But I don't rely on equipment to win. I rely on myself." The Taru's eyes narrowed. "Then let's see if your arrogance matches your skill." He gestured, and the holograms reactivated, this time in a full circle around the human. Blades, spears, maces, all pointed inward, ready to strike in unison. "Start the advanced drill," the instructor ordered. The air seemed to hum with energy as the simulation ramped up. This was a test reserved for the most battle-hardened veterans. No one had ever completed it without injury. But the human didn't flinch. If anything, a faint hint of a smile touched his lips. The attacks came, a maelstrom, of violence. The human moved in a blur of muscle and reflexes. He sidestepped, ducked, spun, and countered with an efficiency that made the holograms appear sluggish. His hands shot out, striking a spear shaft, sending its point off course. He pivoted, avoiding a blade swipe by mere millimeters before sweeping the legs out from another. To the alien students, this wasn't combat. It was art. Each move was executed with a precision that bordered on perfection, as if he had memorized every possible attack pattern and adapted to them all at once. The drill continued, relentless. The human never slowed. His movements grew more aggressive, countering not just defensively but offensively. He disarmed one hologram, then used its simulated weapon to knock another off balance before discarding it entirely. His bare fists and feet were more than enough. How's he not dead? Vor's mouth hung open. The Syrian beside him shook his head, disbelief etched across his face. He's a Deathworlder. What do you expect? The silence among the alien students was suffocating. The human continued to dismantle the simulation, moving faster, fiercer. His strikes carried a controlled fury that the onlookers found difficult to comprehend. The holograms, designed to simulate some of the galaxy's deadliest warriors, crumbled before him. This was not just physical strength, it was the result of a mind honed for combat. Vor clutched his hands together, his pale skin glistening with nervous sweat. This isn't normal. How can they function like this without armor? Without anything? His voice trembled, reflecting the fear brewing in the minds of the other students. It's like he doesn't even need protection. The Syrian beside him muttered, I've read reports, about their world, Earth. The gravity, the predators, the diseases. It's a miracle they're even alive. They're bred for survival. Survival? Vor pointed with a shaky hand at the human, who now leapt into the air to avoid a low, sweeping strike. He landed softly, already turning to meet another attacker. That's not just survival. That's something else. The Taru instructor watched intently, his face betraying a mix of anger and admiration. This was beyond any training he had overseen. The human's refusal to use armor wasn't just bravado. It was a calculated move to demonstrate something deeper. A message, perhaps. One that the alien students were starting to understand, much to their horror. You're fighting against simulations, the Taru called out to the human, his voice sharp. They follow patterns, but patterns can be broken. The human didn't respond with words. Instead, he pivoted to the side, narrowly avoiding a spear thrust, and retaliated with an elbow strike that disrupted the hologram's program, causing it to flicker and reset. The students gasped. Patterns? The human was improvising, adapting to every new scenario the simulation threw at him. He's not following a routine, the Syrian observed, his eyes wide. He's reacting like he's predicting what's coming next. Impossible, Vor snapped, his nerves fraying. No one can predict random combat scenarios that fast. Then what do you call that? The Syrian gestured to the human as he ducked beneath a spinning blade and redirected an energy hammer with his forearm. His skin was marked with light bruises and scrapes, but they only added to the sense of raw, unfiltered capability that radiated from him. The drill intensified. Holograms emerged two at a time, attacking in tandem, aiming to overwhelm him through sheer numbers. The human shifted his stance, his movements becoming sharper, almost brutal. He lunged forward, landing a strike on one opponent's neck while simultaneously sweeping the legs out from another. Adjust simulation difficulty to maximum, the Taru ordered, his voice tight with frustration. Let's see if you can keep up. The air crackled with energy as the holograms recalibrated, glowing brighter, their weapons whirling faster. These were no longer mere training exercises. They now represented the highest level of combat scenarios used to test elite forces. Most soldiers would have collapsed under the pressure by now, but the human surged forward, meeting the challenge head-on. A holographic sword slashed toward his neck. He leaned back just enough to avoid the cut, and in the same motion, his hand darted out to grab the blade, redirecting it to the side. It was like he could feel every movement of the simulation, anticipating the next strike before it even happened. It was as though he wasn't just reacting to the holograms. He was controlling the flow of combat itself. All right, the Taru muttered to himself, impressed despite his best efforts not to show it. Maybe there's something to this human after all.